Beneath the surface of social anxiety lies a labyrinth of unconscious complexities that shape the terror of groups and scrutiny. At the superficial level, the person feels a racing heart and nauseous stomach when speaking to strangers. Below, the ego mobilizes defenses, avoidance, dissociation, self-monitoring to stave off perceived threats. Still deeper, the superego's internalized critical voices amplify fear, replaying early judgments about worthiness and acceptance. The pleasure principle, barely heard under these layers, craves safety and connection, but is shrouded by the reality principle's call to protect the self at all costs. This multi-layered fear emerges from hidden psychic dynamics. First, the conscious fear. Vivid sensations signal danger, triggering a cascade of thoughts. What if I say something stupid? And behaviors, trembling, stumbling over words, retreating into silence. Conscious strategies offer only temporary relief, often reinforcing anxiety when perceived failures confirm the mind's worst predictions. The next layer involves the ego's battle to maintain equilibrium. When the conscience of the superego demands moral perfection and social proficiency, the ego must arbitrate between unacceptable impulses, shame, envy, desire for approval, and external reality. It deploys defense mechanisms. Repression buries shameful memories, projection attributes insecurity to others, and reaction formation enacts exaggerated confidence to mask dread. Beneath the ego's defenses, the superego harbors the internalized voices of caregivers and society. You must perform, you'll be rejected if you fail. These critical injunctions, once adaptive to guide behavior, have calcified into punitive scripts that leave no room for vulnerability. In social contexts, the superego scrutinizes performance, measuring every glance, phrase, and gesture against unattainable ideals. The mind becomes a relentless judge, intensifying anxiety with every minor slip. Deepest in the psyche, the ID's instinctual impulses, desire for connection, intimacy, acceptance, remain stifled. The pleasure principle, which seeks removal of internal tension, is deprived of expression. Without conscious acknowledgement of its needs, the system defaults to self-protective patterns. Anxiety thus becomes a signal not simply of threat, but of unmet primal needs for safety and belonging. Freud saw that unconscious conflicts manifest in everyday distress. Social anxiety exemplifies such conflict. The ID's longing for closeness clashes with the superego's fear of shame, mediated by an overburdened ego. The mind's architecture warps so that social engagement triggers alarm rather than enjoyment. By mapping these layers, the narrative reveals that social anxiety is more than mere shyness. It is an intricate dance of psychic structures, with defensive choreography that recycles ancient fears. Recognizing these strata is the first step. Bringing unconscious voices into light disrupts their automatic power. The person learns that trembling and silence are signals of deeper needs and conflicts, not mere personal flaws. Rewriting this inner drama involves validating the ID's plea for connection, moderating the superego's tyranny, and strengthening the ego's mediation. Simple practices like acknowledging the heartbeat as a messenger, not an enemy, begin to recalibrate the mind's response to social cues. Consciously naming critical self-talk diminishes its authority. Inviting warm, encouraging inner dialogue restores balance. Thus, the hidden architecture of social anxiety consists of conscious alarms, ego defenses, superego critique, and stifled ID desires. By illuminating these layers, the individual gains insight. The mind's fear of groups is not arbitrary, but rooted in complex, unconscious dynamics. This insight becomes a springboard for strategic transformation, opening the path to rituals that confront and rewrite the social story itself. The roots of social anxiety often lie in early childhood experiences, where formative encounters with caregivers and peers first etched fears of rejection and scrutiny deep into the unconscious. In infancy, the child's primary source of relational security is the caregiver's responsiveness. A warm smile and gentle touch reassure safety, while abrupt withdrawal or harsh rebuke sow seeds of confusion and dread. These early affective imprints shape the child's budding ego, embedding expectations that social contact will either soothe or distress. As toddlers venture into independent interactions, joining other children in play, or seeking attention from adults, they face the earliest tests of social acceptance. A caregiver's inconsistent availability may teach the child to anticipate abandonment when exploring groups, triggering distress at the prospect of separation. Similarly, overheard parental criticisms about the child's behavior or abilities become indelible messages. You're not good enough. These original judgments morph into a superego that silently scrutinizes every social move, anticipating condemnation long before words are exchanged. In preschool years, the child's efforts to navigate classroom dynamics further entrench social anxieties, humiliating missteps, tripping during a circle game, forgetting a line in a group song, acquire exaggerated significance in the unconscious narrative. Rather than fleeting embarrassments, these moments transform into recurring nightmares of public failure. The pleasure principle's natural drive to connect and learn becomes overlaid with protective caution, teaching the young psyche to weigh every gesture against the risk of rejection. Family dynamics also sculpt enduring templates for social fear. In homes where achievement is paramount and emotional expression is discouraged, children learn that worth hinges on performance. Applause for success and silence for tears convey a binary. You are valuable only when flawless. This binary carries into adulthood as social anxiety. The fear of being seen as less than perfect paralyzes speech and stifles authentic engagement. Moreover, siblings and early peers contribute to this blueprint. Rivalries for attention predict later apprehension over status in groups. A child overshadowed by an outgoing sibling or bullied by classmates internalizes beliefs that social competence is unattainable, reinforcing avoidance strategies. These unconscious resolutions, better not speak up, persist long after home and playground days end. Attachment styles, a modern parallel to Freudian notions, also reflect these childhood roots. Anxious attachment, characterized by clinging and hypervigilance to social cues, mirrors superego-induced vigilance against rejection. Conversely, avoidant attachment reflects a turning away from connection when early responses were painful. Both styles converge in social anxiety, where the simultaneous yearning for closeness and fear of exposure create internal conflict. Understanding these buried origins illuminates why social anxiety feels so inescapable. The unconscious mind repeats early relational scripts, replaying them in every group setting. The vigorous ego defenses erected to protect the wounded child, repression, dissociation, block conscious access to the original sources of fear, ensuring that anxiety surfaces without clear explanation. Healing begins with tracing these echoes. Reflective journaling about early memories, shame, humiliation, abandonment connects present fears to past events. Therapeutic dialogue or inner child visualization exercises allow the adult to meet the frightened child within, offering reassurance and new relational experiences. By acknowledging the misimpressions of childhood, that social contact equals danger, the individual slowly rewrites the narrative. Groups can be sources of support, not threats to survival. Through excavating these early layers, the person sees social anxiety not as personal weakness, but as a logical outcome of adaptive responses to past hurts. This perspective diffuses shame and opens the way for psychoanalytic rituals that reframe social engagement. By honoring the child's need for safety and gradually expanding the comfort zone, the adult mind learns to approach groups with curiosity instead of dread, completing the path from buried origins to renewed social confidence. Defense mechanisms spring into action when the individual confronts the perceived threat of social exposure, shaping behaviors and distortions that temporarily shield the psyche from intolerable anxiety. Projection, for instance, leads the person to attribute their own fearful thoughts to others, assuming that strangers judge harshly or mock their appearance. In a crowded room, they may scan faces and imagine scorn, even though most are preoccupied with their own concerns. This projection diverts attention from the internal fear while reinforcing the belief that social scrutiny is an external reality. Another common defense is reaction formation. To conceal shame or insecurity, the person may adopt an exaggerated persona, forced cheerfulness or overconfidence that masks genuine vulnerability. In group conversations, they might inundate others with humor or boastfulness, a performance that consumes energy and prevents authentic connection. While the reaction formation silences inner doubt momentarily, it perpetuates distance because the individual fears that revealing true feelings would expose weakness. Repression operates at a more subtle level, consigning distressing memories of early rejection to the unconscious. As a result, the person cannot identify the original source of anxiety in the present moment. Talking to new acquaintances triggers inexplicable panic, yet the memory of the playground humiliation or parental criticism remains buried. This repression ensures that primitive wounding remains active behind the scenes, driving defensive behavior without conscious awareness. Dissociation emerges when anxiety overwhelms capacity to engage. The person mentally checks out, experiencing a sense of unreality or detachment. During a networking event, they may feel as though watching themselves from afar, unable to feel their legs or voice. This dissociation protects against emotional pain, but interrupts the pleasure principle's drive for genuine connection. Over time, repeated dissociation erodes confidence, reinforcing avoidance and feeding further social dread. Rationalization offers plausible explanations to justify avoidance. I don't like meaningless chit-chat, or people here aren't worth my time. These rationalizations provide short-term relief by framing anxiety-driven withdrawal as a conscious choice. However, they also prevent recognition that underlying fear, not true preference, drives behavior. Without acknowledging anxiety's role, the individual remains trapped in self-justifying loops that impede genuine social growth. Intellectualization is another defense, where the person dissects social dynamics abstractly rather than experiencing them. They might read psychological texts on group behavior to feel prepared, yet when entering the live social setting, all their analysis fails to prevent panic. By prioritizing theory over feeling, they avoid confronting the emotional core of their fear, reinforcing the gap between knowledge and lived experience. Freud described how defense mechanisms are necessary for ego survival, yet become pathological when overused. In social settings, these defenses maintain an illusion of stability. The person appears relative calm or detached, yet beneath lies turmoil. Each mechanism shapes a distorted social reality, confirming the unconscious script that groups are perilous. Addressing these defenses requires bringing them into conscious view. Self-reflection exercises, journaling after social encounters, can reveal patterns, noting moments of abrupt withdrawal, hints at repression. Identifying sarcastic remarks signals reaction formation. Simply naming a defense reduces its power, as the ego recognizes it as a learned response rather than an immutable truth. Therapeutic dialogue, whether in psychoanalysis or supportive peer conversations, creates a mirror for these hidden operations. When a listener describes noticing the individual's overcompensation or misattribution of others' intentions, awareness dawns. The person begins to question, did they really think I'm incompetent, or did I project my own fear? This questioning initiates ego strengthening, enabling the capacity to hold anxiety without resorting to defenses. Gradually, the individual can experiment with alternative responses. Instead of projecting judgment, they can gently test others' reactions, asking a question and noting neutral or positive feedback. Challenging reaction formation might involve allowing oneself to admit discomfort in a small group, observing that vulnerability elicits support rather than rejection. Facing repression means deliberately recalling early social hurts in a safe context, acknowledging their ongoing impact. Mindfulness practices complement these efforts, training the individual to observe thoughts and sensations non-judgmentally. When panic arises, noticing the racing heart without immediate dissociation or rationalization opens space for conscious choice. This mindful pause interrupts the defense sequence, allowing the ego to select a more adaptive response, breathing deeply or engaging someone with curiosity instead of retreat. Over time, as defenses loosen, the pleasure principle's subdued voice finds opportunity to express itself. Social interactions transform from battlegrounds to avenues for genuine connection. The person feels the warmth of shared laughter and empathy, reinforcing that groups can be sources of nurturance. The reality principle recalibrates. Social situations carry risk, but also potential for fulfillment. Thus, tracing the tapestry of defense mechanisms in social anxiety reveals their protective origins and pathological persistence. By systematically uncovering projections, reaction formations, and other shields, the individual strengthens the ego's capacity to mediate between ID impulses and superego demands. In this evolving balance, defenses become flexible tools rather than rigid barriers, paving the way for authentic social engagement and lasting relief from anxiety's grasp. Unconscious forces often compel the individual to reenact early relational traumas in social contexts, trapping them in repetitive patterns that confirm deep-seated fears. This repetition compulsion, first identified by Freud, drives people to recreate the same scenarios in which they once suffered, seeking mastery but usually reproducing distress. In social anxiety, these compulsion loops manifest as self-sabotaging behaviors, arriving late to gatherings, avoiding eye contact, or dominating conversations, each echoing earlier moments of shame or rejection. When a person consistently shies away from group invitations, they may unconsciously be replaying childhood experiences of exclusion. The playground outcast who watched peers play without invitation now stands on the periphery of adult social circles, repeating the script in hopes of altering the outcome. Yet because the original trauma remained unprocessed, the unconscious mind defaults to known territory, even if painful. The mind craves resolution but routes all attempts through the same neural pathways, reinforcing the fear rather than dismantling it. Similarly, someone who overcompensates by talking excessively in meetings mirrors early strategies of clinging and performative attention-seeking. A child who resolved abandonment anxiety by performing for caregivers grows into an adult who uses speech as armor, masking insecurity with verbosity. Despite momentary relief, the compulsion traps them in imposter syndrome. I must prove worth through words. Each social triumph only deepens the unconscious belief that silence equals invisibility or rejection. Group settings also trigger transference, the redirection of feelings toward new people that belong to earlier figures. A stern teacher's nagging voice may resound whenever a supervisor offers feedback, transforming neutral comments into harbingers of contempt. The individual then reacts defensively, shutting down collaboration to avoid anticipated scolding. This cycle perpetuates social isolation as peers respond to withdrawal or hostility by disengaging, reinscribing the original fear of harsh judgment. Freud described working through as the process of facing repetition compulsion by consciously re-experiencing and interpreting its roots. Without conscious intervention, compulsion loops continue, binding the person to a social prison. The first step in breaking free is recognizing the pattern, noting that every social mishap feels eerily familiar, echoing a past wound. Journaling about repeated social experiences uncovers these parallels, revealing that avoidance and overcompensation are not isolated missteps, but systematic reenactments. Once recognized, the individual can employ psychoanalytic techniques to interrupt the compulsion. Free association in social contexts involves talking through spontaneous thoughts during interactions rather than withholding them. When fear arises, palpitations, or negative self-talk, they voice the inner commentary. I feel that no one wants me here. This verbalization bypasses repression, exposing the unconscious drama to conscious awareness and reducing its control over behavior. Another method is enactment, a conscious exercise in which the person deliberately chooses a different response within a familiar social script. Instead of avoiding small talk at a party, they approach a group with a question about shared interests. Though anxiety peaks, proceeding through discomfort tests the unconscious expectation of rejection. When the conversation flows or yields neutral responses, the mind updates its internal model. Social engagement can be safe and even rewarding. Role reversal also counters repetition compulsion. By imagining themselves as hosts or mentors rather than anxious participants, the person flips the power dynamic. In a meeting, they visualize guiding colleagues rather than fearing their judgment. This shift weakens the unconscious template of subordinate vulnerability, fostering agency and confidence. Dream analysis, another Freudian tool, offers indirect access to repetition compulsion's origins. Dreams of social failure, being unprepared for an exam, losing one's voice in a crowd, mirror waking fears. Reflecting on these dream metaphors illuminates unconscious expectations. Writing down dreams upon waking and discussing them in therapy or supportive groups helps relate symbolic content to real-life patterns, gradually dissolving compulsion loops as insights accumulate. Over time, integrating these practices rewires the unconscious landscape. Each conscious choice against compulsion fosters new neural connections, reinforcing adaptive responses. Social settings that once felt like prisons become laboratories for experimenting with authenticity. Small victories, smiling at a stranger, sharing a brief anecdote, accrue, demonstrating that the unconscious scripts can be rewritten. In this ongoing process, the ego grows stronger, better able to mediate between desires for connection and fears of exposure. The superego learns to temper its harsh judgments as the individual accumulates evidence of acceptance. The ID's pleasure principle regains influence, allowing enjoyment of social stimuli rather than perceiving them solely as threats. Ultimately, the individual escapes the social prison of repetition compulsion, engaging with others from a stance of self-awareness, resilience, and genuine curiosity. Transformation of social anxiety demands deliberate rituals that confront unconscious fears and rewrite the internal social story. Psychoanalytic practice offers structured exercises that progressively dismantle the power of early scripts, enabling the individual to forge new patterns of engagement. Central to this approach is creating rituals that integrate insight, emotional processing, and behavioral experimentation, each reinforcing a renewed narrative of social competence. The first ritual is the anxiety dialogue, a daily exercise of allocating time to commune with the anxious part of the self. In a quiet space, the individual personifies their social anxiety as a separate voice and records its messages, warnings of humiliation, demands for safety, memories of past rejections. By externalizing these messages in a journal, letter format, bullet points, or free association prose, the person gains distance from them. Then, with equal time, they craft a reply from their adult self, gentle, empathic, and grounded in present reality. This dialogue ritual weakens the superego's harsh critic by fostering self-compassion and conscious understanding of the fear's origins. A second ritual, the micro-exposure sequence, systematically introduces social challenges in graded steps. The person lists 10 scenarios of ascending difficulty, smiling at a barista, asking a colleague a simple question, joining a small group conversation, delivering a brief comment in a meeting, and so on. Scheduling one micro-exposure daily, they practice in real life, initiating the chosen interaction and then debriefing immediately. The debrief focuses on sensory details, what they saw, heard, felt, cognitive appraisals, what thoughts arose, and outcome reality, what actually happened versus feared. This ritual habituates the anxiety response and provides repeated evidence that social situations are manageable. Imagined rehearsal is a complementary mental ritual. Before each micro-exposure, the person spends 5 minutes visualizing the scenario, including potential challenges and their planned adaptive responses. They imagine speaking calmly, hearing supportive reactions, and feeling pride afterward. This mental practice engages the unconscious mind, creating new neural pathways that support confident behavior. The combination of imagination and real-world exposure amplifies learning, as the unconscious integrates positive outcomes alongside conscious achievements. A fourth ritual addresses the repetition compulsion with symbolic correction. The person identifies a past social trauma, perhaps a childhood incident of exclusion, and enacts a symbolic reversal. For instance, if the original scene involved being left out of a game, the person might host a small gathering now, intentionally inviting 1 or 2 individuals to play a simple activity, thereby rewriting the narrative of exclusion. Or they might write a short letter to their younger self, offering the care they once needed, then ceremonially burning or burying it. These symbolic acts carry emotional weight, signaling to the unconscious that the old script is no longer binding. Group reflection circle is a collective ritual that extends psychoanalytic insight into communal contexts. The person joins a supportive group, therapeutic, peer coaching, or interest-based, committing to share one vulnerability each session. This ritual rotates speaking time, ensuring that every member both speaks and listens. Through witnessing and affirmation by others, the individual experiences communal acceptance, directly countering the unconscious anticipation of judgment. Over weeks, sharing in the circle replaces old feelings of isolation with belonging, updating the internal social schema. A final, overarching ritual is daily social affirmation, a morning practice of reciting personalized statements that encapsulate the revised social script. Rather than generic affirmations, these are grounded in psychoanalytic insights. I am worthy of friendly connection. My voice matters even if imperfect. Each moment holds potential for genuine engagement. Repeating these affirmations while observing one's reflection integrates conscious intention with unconscious motivation, aligning desires for connection with a more benevolent superego. Together, these rituals form a cohesive program. Daytime micro-exposures and symbolic corrections reshape behavioral patterns. Reflective dialogues and imagined rehearsals recalibrate internal narratives. Group circles offer real-world counter-evidence to unconscious fears. Affirmations anchor the new script in daily consciousness. Over time, the rituals attenuate social anxiety by replacing rigid, fear-driven patterns with flexible, curiosity-driven engagement. Successful integration of these rituals results in noticeable changes. The individual begins to attend gatherings without dread, engages in spontaneous conversation, and tolerates silence without panic. They notice internal dialogue shifting from self-criticism to self-encouragement, and physiological arousal diminishes as social contexts become perceived as opportunities rather than threats. The pleasure principle re-emerges. The thrill of laughter, the warmth of shared experience, and the deep satisfaction of authentic connection supplant the old dominance of fear. Freud taught that sustained change emerges from working through unconscious conflicts with patience and self-awareness. These rituals embody that teaching, offering practical steps to bring the unconscious into dialogue with the conscious self. As the individual repeatedly enacts new social stories, the mind rewires itself, dissolving the tyranny of early fears and liberating the person to engage fully with others. Ultimately, the rituals foster a resilient social identity. When the individual encounters new groups, professional teams, community events, everyday interactions, they draw on the psychoanalytic work embedded in these practices. Anxiety still appears, but now serves as a messenger rather than a master, guiding the person toward deeper understanding rather than shutting them down. In this transformed social narrative, the individual stands not as a victim of unconscious fear, but as an active author of their own relational destiny.